Okay, everyone, so today's lesson is going to focus on the city and country clash. So our objectives and standards. Our objectives are to analyze how small town life differed from city life and to describe how criminals took advantage of Prohibition. And the standards are there as well if you'd like to take a look at them. Our vocabulary preview: Prohibition, Speakeasy, and Bootlegger. The essential question: how did life in the city differ from life in small towns? And I want you to think about this. Should government become involved with moral issues on how people live their lives? This is going to be a big question that pops up during Prohibition, leading up to Prohibition, so it's just something I'd like you to think about. So making a move. By 1920, a little more than half of Americans lived in communities with high populations. So for example, New York City had 5.6 million people, Chicago had almost 3 million people, and Philadelphia had almost 2 million people. Okay, so between 1922 and 1929, city populations exploded. So a new urban lifestyle. Americans began to move away from the small town way of life and their conservative views of life. The life of the big cities was much faster than slow-paced country life, but city life was strange and challenging too. The activities that country residents saw as wrong, such as gambling or drinking, are going to run wild in the cities. And sometimes Americans get a little, frightened about this, and some want to go back to the way of country life that was simpler. So Prohibition. So in January 1920, the 18th Amendment goes into effect. This prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Now the reason for this is some Americans believed alcohol was to blame for the problems in society and support the decision. Others believed the government was becoming too involved in things they were not supposed to, and that's what our think about it question was about. Should the government become involved like things like this? But either way, it does go into effect, and this becomes known as Prohibition. So defining the law. So Americans, again, some supported, some did not, but those who did not support it are going to defy the 18th Amendment in different ways. People went to underground clubs known as a speakeasy to obtain alcohol. Now, these were called speakeasies since you had to speak softly to avoid being detected while inside. And also to gain access to it, you had to either have a certain ID or a password to enter as well. And these could be found anywhere and everywhere, okay? So those were what speakeasies were. People also attempted to make their own alcohol, which was illegal, but they tried to make their own alcohol. Also, if they could not, get into a speakeasy or make their own alcohol, they could buy from a bootlegger. Now, a bootlegger is someone who smuggled alcohol from outside the United States and sold it. So the rise of organized crime. So Prohibition also led to the rise of organized crime in the United States. Al Capone, you may have heard his name before, became powerful by being a bootlegger and starting a bootlegging empire. But either way, as he, gets rid of his competition, he's obviously going to create crime and things like that. So in the 1920s, there were 552 bloody crime headlines in the newspapers. And there's a picture of Al Capone there. Like I said, you may have seen his picture before and know who he is. He is eventually caught and thrown in jail for different reasons, but Prohibition does lead to the rise of crime in the United States. So the end of Prohibition. By the middle of the 1920s, only about 19% of Americans support the 18th Amendment. So a lot of Americans felt it did more harm than good. Remember, there's a lot of crime going on, and things of that nature. And also the government had a difficult time enforcing the 18th Amendment, and it's costing the government money to enforce it, and they're not really having a lot of success with it. So finally, in 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed the law, and alcohol would become legal again in the country. Okay, so to wrap it up. So remember that in the 1920s, Americans are going to move to the cities, and the values of the city, like we talked about, such as gambling and drinking and those types of things, are going to clash with the views of the countryside. And some people want to go back to the countryside. Some people like the city. More people are going to like staying in the cities. We also have Prohibition, and Prohibition is the ban of selling and manufacturing and transportation of alcohol, but it's going to cause Americans to find other ways to obtain alcohol, like going to speakeasies, or making their own alcohol, or finding a bootlegger who will give it to them. And also Prohibition is going to cause this crime wave or crime spree, and this is where Al Capone kind of comes to power as well, is through bootlegging and through Prohibition. Okay, everyone? So that's all for the lesson today. Be sure to answer the questions, and I will see you soon.